understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time. Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. I am really excited today to bring you Ben Gleisner, CEO of Cogo. It's going to be a very interesting conversation. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, all good down here in New Zealand, other side of the world. But yeah, we do have FinTech down here too.
I love it. I love it. You think you are first person that we are interviewing from New Zealand. So this will be an exciting conversation on multiple levels. Today's show topic is climate change matters, and banks can help solve it. When I first came across Cogo, just very interesting business model. I want to dive into it. More importantly, I want to dive into Ben's background. But before we go further, I have to do some housekeeping. By the time you see this episode, we will be streaming live from LinkedIn to Twitch, Facebook, and LinkedIn, Twitch, Facebook. Yep, I think those are our stuff that we'll be streaming live from. So you'll see that at the time we'll be airing the show. This is a pre-recorded show. So yes, our first one. So
time zone's a bit tricky. We're in the future here, though. We're a day ahead of you all in the States. So, and I can tell you, in the future, climate change is a problem. So we're here to solve it.
So you know what? You brought it up. Before I get into it, I have to do you due justice. I need to read Ben's background, and we'll jump into the show. Ben is an economist, environmentalist, and social entrepreneur. He completed a master's in climate change economics in 2006 and has founded several businesses and charities. He worked for 6 years as a senior economist at the New Zealand Treasury, leading teams on climate change policy and well-being metrics. He became fed up with flying and very little action going on and found Cogo. Cogo is a carbon footprint management product that helps individuals and businesses to measure, understand, and reduce their impact on the climate. Cogo does this through partnerships with some of the world's largest banks to integrate leading carbon tracking functionality into their banking apps. Ben is passionate about using data and behavioral science to create a systematic, positive impact.
Well,
so I'm like, thanks, man. Before we get into Cogo and what it does, I think it's a fascinating business. One of the ones that I came across is because you're attacking this problem at an angle that I never even thought about. So Ben and I came across Ben's company when I was at Money 2020. Been fascinated ever since. But before we go into Cogo, I want to talk about you. Your background. Like, how does an economist transition into trying to save the world and climate change? How does that work?
As per intro, my master's and my degree was in environmental economics. So I guess economics is about things like inflation and about, whatever interest rates and growing GDP for sure. But it ultimately is also, the ideas of economics is how do we build, prosperity and I suppose a good life for everybody. That's what we're trying to do in our economy. It's not just to make more shit; it's to make things that people value and improve their lives. And so, I was working in Treasury, which is the Ministry of Finance, similar in the US, the Treasury Department. And one of the areas that I was looking after was climate change policy. So governments were committing to these targets to reduce the emissions, and I was making sure that the economic impacts were understood and that we were doing our fair share. So New Zealand's contribution was fair relative to how much the US or Europe. So anyway, I was inside government working on this stuff. We were doing lots of these conferences, flying around the world. And as you said, I sort of felt like this is 2008. I met actually your president at the time, 2009, Barack Obama in Copenhagen, and he was negotiating or pushing US policy around this climate thing. But fair to say, it was going nowhere, and there was just people flying around causing climate change and talking about how to solve it and not solving it. And so I was like, look, we've got to use software. Let's use technology. How do we really empower individuals and businesses to do something? And I suppose that's where the idea came about, which was, I looked around the world and platforms like whatever, the Airbnbs, the Ubers, this software is what was driving behavior change. And so I was like, hey, why don't we build a software company to help drive behavior change, not to make it easier to find a lift home or a place to stay or to buy some hotel bookings, whatever it is. It's actually use the same technologies, but to drive behavior change around climate. And that's where it all started.
It's amazing. So prior to your master's and for that, were you interested in climate change? Like, was that a passion from a young age, or did it really develop during your master's program?
We were brought up, I was born in England, so we lived in the UK for 10 years. And then my parents said, look, why don't we take a year off school and travel around the world for a whole year? So we just ditched school and went around the world. My dad's a doctor, and he was working in different countries. We went to China, India, all through Southeast Asia, Australasia, America. Long story short, got back home. It was like quite an eye-opening experience as a kid. So I think that helped a bit. My parents were always quite like, I suppose, not looking to buy more things, but to build experiences. So I guess I got a look at the world. And I think during that time, and definitely in my sort of teenage years, I think I realized that maybe we were heading in not the best direction, or at least there were some impacts that were going on that maybe were, I don't know, a little bit a sort of symptom of a wider problem around how we're measuring progress in the world. So I suppose this work I did in Treasury around climate was also positioned as how do we make sure we build our economies in ways that are, not undermining the natural ecosystem or leaving too many people behind. And so I guess I've always been interested in this idea of what does progress mean? And climate change in my mind is a symptom of a problem around we haven't thought about some of the impacts of all of this economic activity. And so I guess interested in the space. Climate seems like one of the symptoms of this problem about how do we correct, global systems. Big picture stuff, right?
Yeah, big picture. No, good stuff. I think a lot of people, right, just day to day, I think they struggle, especially, I would say here in the US, struggle with understanding the impact of climate change, from a standpoint, from people I talk to regarding climate change, especially if you grow up in a colder climate, you're just happy it's warmer, right? like, wow, I remember when winter was a lot colder and it snowed more. We had a really good every year. It's like, hey, our winters are getting better, right? So that's the thought process, at least for people I talk to, right? But I want to read you off some stats. I want you to add some other stats. A couple of things he said, right? Since the late 19th century, the temperature has risen 2 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 degree Celsius, with the most warming occurring in the past 40 years. 2023 was officially the warmest year on record, surpassing 2016 and 18. Global sea level rise approximately 8 inches since 1880, with an accelerating rate in recent decades. Let me get some more here. That's a threat to coastal communities. Rising sea levels threaten millions living in low-lying areas. Ice sheets and glaciers, Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets are losing mass at alarming rates, contributing to the sea level rise. Glaciers worldwide are shrinking rapidly, impacting freshwater supplies and ecosystem. Extreme weather events, frequency and intensity increasing globally, with more heat waves, droughts, floods, wildfires, and storms. Greenhouse gas emission, primarily driven by fossil fuel burning, deforestation, industrial processes. Some health impacts, health-related deaths expected to increase significantly, particularly among vulnerable population. The spread of diseases, changes in weather pattern can facilitate the spread of vector-borne diseases like malaria, dengue fever. Food security, climate change disrupts agricultural production, threatening food security for millions. Economics costs, billions of dollars in damages caused by extreme weather events, each year?
I mean, as I said, I've probably done 20 years of hearing these sort of warnings, and it is a little bit of a, disappointment maybe that we just has still seem so sort of, I don't know, short term. A lot of these effects still seem to be, it's in the future and it will affect other people. That's what most people think. Or that, it's a bit warmer. It used to be called global warming, and I think that was one of the reasons the framing was changed to climate change, because, as you say, I mean, one quote I like from an ex, I think, vice president of the States, and it's just so sad that it's so political in the States. I just don't know why it's like one party effectively believes in it, the other one doesn't. I just think that's a real problem for the States. But anyway, it was Al Gore who was a big pusher of this issue. And he recently announced some stats around what effectively we're doing with all of the increasing carbon dioxide that's going up and methane and stuff into the atmosphere, is we're adding layers onto a greenhouse, like, the amount of, you think about a greenhouse, right? You walk in there and it's all warm because it's effectively got glass on the outside and it keeps the heat in, keeps energy in. We have, over the last, period of a few hundred years, just keeping on adding to the thickness of the glass that's surrounding our Earth and the atmosphere. That's the way it's called, the greenhouse effect, right? So we're adding this layering of glass that is now trapping each day the equivalent energy of 600,000 atom bombs. So the amount of energy, it's not about warmth, it's not about like a little bit more sunny, it's simply a factor of we've got way more energy and we're continuing to build the energy inside out. It's only 10 miles up that this glass is, right? It's not like thousands of kilometers, it's not that far up. We're trapping all this gas that's causing these, like, this glass to thicken, which is basically creating these massive energy like systems, which is causing droughts. It's causing, think about more energy in a system. The winds will be stronger, the droughts will be bigger, the sea level rise comes from the extra heat. And it's just a bit like, there's all those impacts that are going to affect affect the world and your health and your economies. I think ultimately, if from a sort of ethics and, I don't know, moral point of view, the worst thing is the people who are going to be impacted are not the people that have caused it. And that, to me, really is profoundly important for us as a species to sort of recognize that we'll be all fine. People on incomes like us will just, move to a nicer place and we'll, whatever it is, we'll manage, right? But Bangladesh or poor communities and, southeast parts of the states who get hit by these cyclones, they're not the ones that are causing all this climate change. And I suppose that's what really bites me, is I think we will end up with a society that breaks down because Bangladesh and societies like that will come to New Zealand, Australia, the States, and say, we've got 1 billion of us now without homes. You've destroyed our entire life and you weren't doing anything about it when you were told that you should. So yeah, I don't know. I feel a little bit like we've got to do something about it from a moral point of view, but also from an economic.
And I think that's like sometimes the disconnect, at least from people, in the States, and, in climate change. We don't have a lot of those conversations because we're just so disconnected.
It's like it doesn't feel like it's very informed is probably the conversation. I feel like it's either you don't believe it because your dad or some TV show tells you that it's not true and that there's been glaciers in the past and whatever it is, like very, very limited understanding, and then just jump on a sort of climate change as a hoax. Or it is real, but the responsibility is not your own. Like, as in, like, what am I supposed to do about it? It's not my problem. It's the oil company's problem. And I think we're, with Cogo, trying to empower people to be like, yes, oil companies and these people are responsible, but also we're responsible. Like, you're responsible, I'm responsible, and we should be empowered to do something about it. And back to the sort of fintech positioning, you manage your money and you're responsible for managing your money. And I guess we think that the future will be responsible around managing your carbon and what you're doing to the world around you. And, that seems part of the world that we need to create.
So I want to dive into Cogo because I think it's fascinating. But before we do, right, I want to set the stage, right? Oh. So we talked about climate change. We talked about the impact. So what now you're saying, right, is each and every one of us can make a difference.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's the only thing that will ultimately make a difference. As in, governments can set some policy and do some regulation, but in the end, it's, you know, businesses and, you know, individuals and whatever, it's our behaviors that cause climate change. So whether they decide to put a subsidy on solar panels or they decide to, whatever they do in a regulatory way, in the end, we as a society need to buy more solar panels, or we need to change our behavior. And basically the numbers are something like every year we need to be reducing our impact on climate, basically how much carbon we produce, by about 5%. So in other words, each year we need to go down by 5% to get back to the point of we can't keep on adding glass to this greenhouse. We need to get to a point where as a world, we have actually not added each year any more glass to the greenhouse, because that's the only way that we'll sustain life on Earth, is not to continue to accelerate this sort of energy, you know, explosion, let's say.
Yeah, no, I mean these are really great points, and one more question before I jump into Cogo, because I want to make the connection, right?
Yeah.
You have someone in the States, I don't know, layoffs are happening. They're struggling. They're trying to find jobs, trying to figure out their life, their income, different things like that. You talk about something like climate change, and they're like, yeah, but I have problems right now. I don't even know how I can make a difference. That's so far removed. I don't even understand what climate change is. You talk about reducing carbon footprint. I don't even know what carbon is. I don't even know how that works. But what I do know is I need to work.
I got to pay my power.
I got to pay my bills. Right? I need to drive to work. I need to do these things. Help me just make that connection to those people.
I think it's fair to say people like that are on a low income and are looking to basically make ends meet to just survive. I'd say let's not burden them with a responsibility on solving climate change, because they're not the ones that are causing it, right? I would say we need to position this responsibility on middle, upper earning incomes. So people that have, you know, basically got both because it basically is proportional. So the amount of money you're earning and the amount of capital that you've got is a function of your impact on climate. So I would say Cogo really tries to target those people who have not do I have enough money to pay for the groceries? Do I have enough money to figure out how to, you know, find another job and things? That is not really our target market. Our target market are people who, you know, earn $200,000-$300,000, you know, have got three cars, are going on holidays, you know, 3 times a year. Like, they're the ones causing climate change. And I suppose that's probably an important positioning for this, is that we don't want. Now, it's not to say that people who, you know, on lower incomes and stuff, you know, shouldn't be able to feel empowered to do it. But we don't want to position this as everyone has an obligation. There are people with greater obligations.
All right. Now, segueing into that, can you explain what Cogo does?
Definitely, yeah. So every time you spend money, you create climate change, pretty much, unless you're buying trees. So almost every spend that you make has an impact. So if you've got $100 in your pocket, if you spend $100 on a flight, it creates about 500 kilograms of carbon dioxide. So let's say 500 bits of glass get chucked up into the atmosphere and added to the greenhouse. So $100 on a flight, 500. Maybe if you buy gas in the car, it's similar, quite a lot. So 100 to 500. If you go to the grocery shop, spend $100, it's about maybe 100 kilograms of 100 bits of glass. So in other words, it's actually 5 times less impactful to buy groceries than buy fuel or flights. But buy some clothes, maybe it's only 50. So it's the idea being is that every dollar you spend has an impact, but every dollar you spend doesn't have the same impact. So that's probably the first thing we do, is we convert people's spending data. So you look at your banking app. So sitting inside NatWest or 20 odd banks around the world now have got this feature where it tells you not how much you're spending in certain categories of spend, like restaurants, cafes, you spend this much, whatever. It tells you how much carbon you're creating through that spending. So that's number one, is we help people measure their footprint. Does that make sense?
Listen, totally makes sense, right? What you can't measure, you can't improve. Classic saying. So I get that part.
Good. So that's the measurement, and it sounds important, but it's probably the least important part of our business. I mean, it's almost like you want to make sure it's credible, and that, when you're buying, electricity in Ohio, that you're given a number that is relative to the Ohio electricity grid. So you want to make sure the number is accurate enough, but not perfect. But then the entire focus for us is then to say, well, look, here's your carbon footprint based on all of this spending data, and then design experiences that help you reduce that. So here's what it looks like. Here are the top 3 areas of your spending that cause carbon. And then things like, hey, did you know you could switch from gas, for your oven to maybe electric, or you could put some solar on your roof, and maybe that saves some money as well. So we're trying to personalize effectively this whole, like, what can I do about it? You want to make it like almost like your own personal little climate action plan that says, hey, here are the 3 things you can do based on how much you're spending in certain areas. Here's some lending from the bank, maybe pretty good interest rate, and maybe the savings that you make from reducing your electricity by putting solar on the roof actually pay more than the interest rate. So you can make it an economic argument as well. But the personalization of it all is very important. And that's part of what we do, is we don't just measure your footprint, but we help you reduce it. And we give you little pats on the back. So instead of catching an Uber, if we see you on the metro, the app or the feature tells you, hey, well done, you've just caught Metro, that saves this much carbon relative to Ubers. So it's all gamifying and making it sort of an experience that people feel rewarded for the small things that they do. And then over time, they can see how they're tracking relative to others and relative to themselves. So yeah, similar, I guess the thing to think about is probably like a Fitbit for the planet is one framing, right? Yeah.
So to further understand it, right, is this something where I bank, you use NatWest, for example, so I'm just going to go with that example.
Bank of America, Wells Fargo, whatever.
I bank at Wells Fargo. Do I opt into this? Is it automatically just shown on my app? How does that process work?
It's opted in. I think what we've found over a bunch of banks working is that they think that they don't quite want to go out everybody. So the idea of like pushing this climate agenda, particularly in the States, it's fair to say the banks we're talking to in stateside are very nervous about this, partly because I think, the point you made at the beginning, which is some people just don't believe in it. And if they get told to do something about it without opting in, they may get pissed off. So in almost all cases, the user says, pop-up might appear and, hey, do you want to help save your energy bill and do your bit for the climate change, or whatever it is. Like, the positioning is quite important to be both financial as well as climate benefit. But let's just say there's an opt-in, which it always is, apart from a couple of cases. You then just press a button that says, I'm keen on this. And then inside the banking app, the feature pops up and it says, hey, here's your carbon footprint from last month and the last 6 months, and here's how much it comes from, where it comes from, and here's some things to do about it. But yeah, we're seeing 10 to 20% of customers opting in. It's pretty amazing. Like, I was surprised. Like, is this 1% or whatever, this fringe greeny thing? The answer is no. It's a lot more than people think. There's actually,
that's surprising to me too. Wait a minute, even more before I get totally surprised. What region are you seeing? What area around the world are you seeing this uptick?
Not in America. Like, literally everywhere else in the world. Like, I can't believe it. I'm like, come on, people. This is why I'm on this show. I'm like,
that's exactly why I said before I get surprised. Where exactly? So no, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so it's everywhere. Like, it's funny. Like, yeah, I mean, you don't want to labor the point, but the rest of the world looks at America on this issue and says, why is the country that's caused most of the damage in the world on this putting their head in the sand and not thinking and being completely like, I don't know. It's pretty disappointing, I have to say. It's probably many great things come from America, but climate change action is certainly not one of them.
What are your stats in America that people using your?
Well, I mean, the number one stat we've got is how many tier one banks are either live or contracted to go live sometime, in the next 12 months. And so just to give you context, Australia, 75% of the entire tier one banking sector will have this feature in their banking apps.
Oh, wow.
They're currently at 50. So in other words, half of all the tier one banks. Singapore will be close to 35% probably, and so pretty decent. Netherlands is about, I think, 50-60%. So Netherlands, so Europe. So what I'm saying is there's quite a few. Hong Kong's looking pretty solid for the next 12 months. UK's been great. America is 0, or at least that we know about. We know there's lots of positive chat going on around this, but it just feels like, and this is North America more broadly, so let's not just call out the US. Let's call North America. And yeah, it's sad, and it's seen as a sort of really big risk for a bank to do it, because partly this whole political thing and their customer base. But anyway, long story short, there isn't any hope at the moment in the next 12 months that you'll be able to open whatever bank you're with and see this feature inside your app. We're talking, and there's lots of positive people, but as soon as it gets further up the organization, it feels like it's sort of, I don't know.
So that's another thing, right? So because I was thinking about that as you were talking. One, it's not adopted by the banks here in the States, so the end users are not going to obviously see that. No. Because it would be interesting. And two, right, what I'm really curious about is, you go to other countries and the way they use certain fintech applications in their banks are different from the way we may use it in the States, right? So for instance, right, I can speak for myself personally. I don't remember. I've logged on to the websites of my banks. It's been a while since I used the apps, every once in the blue moon. But I don't need to. It's like something. All these things are auto. How does it work? So for Cogo, I'm making an assumption. Correct me where I'm wrong. It will be available either on the app, or if I go to my website to check my balances, and I'll see this. If I was in another country, right, like Australia, I would see this.
Yep, they do have both apps, definitely. It's interesting, because in countries like Australia and UK and Singapore and stuff, app usage rates is like 30, 40, 60 sometimes % of the entire customer base. So there's more than half of all customers using the app. So I think it's maybe a little bit. There's also massive investment going in Citi, Bank of America, and they're investing a lot of money into their mobile technologies, particularly their app. So I suppose our bet is that will still continue, that they do want their customers digitally engaged, and that the mobile, products are the ones that they're investing in. But yeah, it's obviously, it is a digital product, right? So you're going to need to find somebody somewhere inside that banking environment.
Because, I would assume with another question I had to ask you, did you ever get pushback on the concept of Big Brother? Like, I feel like I'm being watched and things of that nature.
Yeah. I think the reality is banks are doing this all the time. Like, they're already watching you, right? So they're already watching you, getting data on you and selling it and marketing and stuff. Like, in other words, it's already happening. So the banks know everything about what you buy already. I suppose our argument is, well, if there's one thing that maybe you might want to opt into, is at least finding something out about climate, because that helps you. So it might be, seen as more information on you, but in many ways, if you opt in for it and you see value in it, at least it's transparent about what it's doing, rather than half the time your data is stolen without you even knowing, or effectively used. And I think we're trying to at least be open about it. So that's one point. It's fair to say we started in the UK as an app that was on the App Store, and we integrated with open banking. So we were the first technology in the world to bring in all of the open banking infrastructure with sustainability and climate stuff. So we first started by, hey, go download our app and connect one of your 35 different banks we had as connected into the system. So that was the starting point. But the reality is that people were a bit reluctant to hand over all their financial data into some app. So that's why we went to the banks, and that's worked well with millions of people now using it.
When you say millions of people, how many users do you have worldwide?
Yeah, we're depending on whether you include users that check once and then come back every 2 months or 3 months or every days, it depends. But I can say there are millions of people. There are about 50 million people who have access to the product globally. Yeah, which now that's the thing. Wells or Bank of America, I mean, they've got such an opportunity to help move the dial on this, because in one bank that's 40-50 million. So it's fair to say we're not giving up hope on America. We do think there are a lot more people that are interested, like you're saying, like just would like to know more. And we're coming with a pretty strong mission that this is not about making another $1 billion business to try and make money for money's sake. So we're not here to pull your wool over your eyes and just pretend we're trying to do it for the reasons like I've spent 20 years focusing on this. Is we fundamentally care about the world, and we don't want people to not be empowered to do something that they will be grateful for in 20, 30 years time when they have kids that aren't in big conflicts because we don't have wars around, resource stuff that is caused by climate, which is what's going to happen, right? And that's probably what drives us here.
It's a very interesting mission. I want to ask you a question about the opt-in and how far you go back. You mentioned 6 months. Does it go back further, or that is like the baseline standard?
12 months is usual, 6 to 12, something like that. Like it gives you that like record of what your last year, let's say, was. Okay. And obviously month on month is quite important, because you might be like using more power in winter, or you might be air conditioning summer, you might be traveling, catching flights in certain holiday seasons. So the whole idea, as I said, is we've got to reduce 5% year on year. And so we're just trying to bring down the bars of these charts. And so trying to help people figure out ways that could save them money. It could, it's not always negative here. It's not always like, hey, solving climate change costs money. Back to your point around, I've got to deal with getting a job and I've got to pay my bills. Well, getting out of certain costs like gas and, your electricities and things, like there are actually ways to save money and save the climate.
So now, and how does that work from a user perspective, right? I know some people don't use their debit cards a lot. They use their credit cards more so. How does that work with Cogo? Are you also working with credit card companies like an Amex, or do you just look at?
So our technology, it's like an API. The bank and the user can effectively connect any data that they've got into the banking environment. So in cases where banks only see certain transactions as an Amex card, we would need the user to consent. Obviously, this is what open banking is doing, obviously, around the world, is allowing users to share data from other financial sources into a third party. So I think that's already happening. So it's not us that's necessarily not able to combine those Amex data with your bank data, but it will require the bank to have that capability to connect other data points into your banking system. But that's live with, at least quite a few of the big ones now that you can connect your other bank data in.
So, I mean, and in terms of the details, you were mentioning before, how deep can it go? Like if you have someone who's a vegetarian, for instance, versus someone who's not, or vegan, per se, you can't see their grocery list. You just saw that they went to the store and purchased items, right? But you don't know.
Sure, yeah. So went to Walmart or went to, I don't know, Whole Foods or whatever.
Yeah.
What we see is this is how much they spent, and then this is the category of the spend. So, merchants might be like, we might be able to see, Chinese restaurants or, hamburger shops and things like that. So you do get some granularity in terms of picking out what category. Obviously, all your flights and all your energy bills and a lot of your spending, your petrol, your gas station, all of that stuff is pretty easy to know. Where it gets complicated is where you're buying and there's a basket that you're buying. So if you're going to a big box retail or whatever it is, supermarkets, right now we have a thing which allows a user to say, hey, I'm a vegetarian. And so when they go and buy, we're able to create a slightly different basket based on what the average person buys at, say, Whole Foods, in terms of, a mix of, it's 10%, red meat, it's 3% white meat, it's 3% dairy, milk, 2% cheese, whatever it is. So we've got like a virtual basket that the average American buys. And so then we can work out, when you spend $100 at Whole Foods, if you're just the average American buying a basket of products for $100, on average, it's a kilogram of carbon for every dollar of spend. But if you don't eat red meat, we pull out the red meat and we put in more white meat and fish and things like, so we're obviously having to make some assumptions, but it's fair to say, just rough numbers is you spend $1 in a supermarket or $100, it's about 100 kilograms of carbon if you're eating meat and red meat. It's about 90 kilograms if you don't eat red meat. It's about 75 kilograms if you're vegetarian, and it's about 60 if you're a vegan, right? So it's still 60. It's 60 of, versus 100. So it's not like suddenly you're going to save the world if you start buying only vegan products. They still have an impact on climate, right?
No, that's
but that's the information people need, right? That's the thing, is if people are told, you know what, the $100 you're spending on that flight is worth 20 trips to the grocery store spending the same $100, maybe you're like, hey, maybe I could save on a flight and, save some money and buy a few more groceries, and then I save money and save climate. I don't know. That's what people need to sort of get their heads around is,
With the idea with the flights, though, I have to go, I don't know, 1,000 miles away, right?
Yeah.
What's my alternative, man?
Yeah, sure. I think it's fair to say in America, there's not that many. So like, obviously, you can jump on a fast train in other areas of the world, but in America, not so. And I think back to the sort of, we're not saying that you can't fly. I flew to a funeral a few months ago, and sure, you'll have to fly. It's probably those discretionary things where it's like, I'm sick of this, I don't know, cold weather. Maybe I'm going to fly down for a little holiday somewhere. And it's just this ability to say, you know what, we don't need to do everything that we currently do. We're spending a lot of money on things that maybe, you know what, I could probably put that money into something else. And I don't know, the difference between spending $1,000 on a holiday flying down to Florida, to go and, I don't know, spend some money at, I don't know, some event, is probably 5 times more carbon intensive than spending half that money, going locally and doing an activity like going for a hike or whatever it is. Like, it's this ability to say, I can spend the same money or maybe even less money and have another experience that's 10 times better for the world.
I can see people watching this episode and saying, you know what, honey, listen, I want to do my part to save the world. That vacation to Bali? No, we're going to stay local.
Or
go over well.
Yeah, I think, I guess that's the challenge that we've got, if I'm blunt about it, as a species, is like, you know what, we can just continually sort of, go as business as usual and do all these things. And I just wonder if we really sat back and thought, things like, the amount that people work, and this isn't to say that there's anything wrong in terms of like working heaps, but, we could possibly, I think, as a society say, look, I'd like more time to hang out, back to your wife comment, right? So I'd like more time to be with my kids, hang out with my wife. So I'm willing to do 4 days working. And yes, we'll be needing to sacrifice maybe one trip to Bali every now and again, whatever it is. But that's actually worth it. And that as a society, we end up being better off. We're healthier because we're doing more exercise and being more, whatever it is, active. We're not spending so much money on things that are not good for us. You could argue that society could actually be happier and healthier, and the climate could be better by like just shifting the amount and where we spend money. And that's what we're saying. It's not necessarily about sacrifice. It could actually be you can spend money differently and have a better life. And I think we're conned into a lot of stuff to buy, from social expectations, from looking like your neighbors and keeping up with them, and from whatever it is, a bunch of things, marketing, you name it, right? A lot of pressures on us to like consume whatever we're told to, when actually I think there are some things we could sit back from and go, you know what, I think I could spend my money a bit differently and have an okay life. But there's a lot of pressures on it, right?
So no, really interesting. We're going to continue this conversation. We have to take a message from a moment for our sponsors, and we'll be right back with more with Ben.
Great.
Are you an emerging fintech with a limited budget seeking more sales and partners? Introducing Strategic Generation, your partner in leveraging cybersecurity for sales and partner enablement. Fintechs often lose opportunities due to unsophisticated cybersecurity programs. That's where we come in. Strategic Generation assists with due diligence, security posture visibility, penetration testing, and on-demand virtual CISO services. We connect your systems to our partnered platform, and voila! Instant access to real-time diagnostics and compliance frameworks such as SOC 2 and PCI DSS. Gain the confidence of prospects and partners. Strengthen your cybersecurity program and drive success. Stop losing deals due to cybersecurity. Visit strategicgeneration.com and click on Demand CISO to connect with an expert.
And just like that, we are back. Ben, as of right now, like, what are some of your biggest challenges in Cogo?
I think there's this thing you mentioned around like climate change being seen as a sort of like a non-issue or something that people can't do about, and I suppose in some ways do anything about. I think that's causing some banks, particularly as I said, North American, to be a little bit nervous about putting it in front of their customers. So I think if there was one thing that would be great to overcome would be the fact that banks need to not worry that they can opt in the customer. So there's an option to opt in, and you'd find that there is still 5, 10, 15% minimum of your customers that do want to do something about it. So I suppose that would be great if we could overcome that, because banks worry that it's like only 1% of customers care, and then there's 10% that don't care, and then there's not already a good reason to do it. So that's one challenge, is convincing banks that customers want this, or at least would be interested in, that's number one. I think the macro climate at the moment is tricky. So economic pressures on both budgets within banks and then capital markets make it a difficult time for any business, I think, at the moment to really sort of excel. And a business that's doing something that's like long-term, good for the world and stuff is a challenge. So that's probably that economic sort of climate is a bit tricky. I don't know, need more people like you to talk about climate change and get on podcasts. It would be good to see more people talking about it. So yeah, appreciate the call.
That's cool. And I'm going to leave this up to you, but out of curiosity, like, we talked about climate change, and usually we talk about these social impact type of projects. They're usually nonprofits, charity based, but you're like a hardcore fintech, man. Like you guys are actually like, can you describe the business model? Like how is the revenue generated? Like what's the win for the bank? If you feel comfortable.
Yeah. The banks, no problem. Banks buy, I guess, our service, and so we are being paid by the banks. And I guess they see, and again, NatWest, for example, 20% of their customers value this. They've opted into it. They want to use it. So I suppose number one, I guess, thing the banks get is they get to attract and retain customers who ultimately then buy mortgages. And, we're talking about a pretty valuable customer for a bank. These are 25, 40 sort of old, women slightly more than men. These are the people who will make decisions on, which bank to choose for their mortgage. They'll make decisions on which credit cards and services to buy. So they are very, very they're high discretionary earner, as in they're usually, as I said, that $100,000, $200,000 sort of income bracket. So they're good customers to keep happy. So that's number one, banks like that. Number two is banks are committing lots of money to invest into climate change in terms of supporting reductions and lending money to do that. And so you think about our tool, it's like inside Wells Fargo, for example, it might be like suddenly there's 500,000 people who are engaged in the app that maybe weren't interested and now they are. And so Wells is like, that's awesome. But then of the 500,000, maybe 100,000 of them have got a home that could use solar panels. And so Wells can put a product up and say, hey, here's a loan for you to borrow to put solar on your roof inside the feature, so that then they opt into, so there's a way of monetizing through lending. And then some banks, you can clip the ticket on that. So you effectively have this hundreds of thousands of customers that want to buy electric cars, solar panels, heat pumps, and they could potentially clip the ticket on the referrals to those companies. So there's a bunch of ways. At the moment, we license it like a SaaS type product, but the banks can then accelerate lending. And in the future, we'd like to build this sort of marketplace that whether you're in, Florida or, Santa Barbara, we would connect you up with the local providers of the solar or heat pump or whatever it is, and then connect through the banking app. So the provider wins, the bank wins because they get to lend more money and see reductions, which they're regulated to do. And then we win because we can take a little bit of that money along the way.
Now, another question, you talked a lot about, like retail customers. Like, does your app also help businesses that bank with?
Yep. There's, and I mentioned the word regulation in California anyway, and I'm sure it's coming. The Treasury Department in the States actually is consulting at the moment around this, or SEC, sorry, not Treasury, around regulations that banks are going to be required to reduce the emissions of their customers they lend money to. So that's coming. So again, this might not just be a nice to have for a bank. Pretty soon, globally anyway, there's definitely banks now that are mandated to measure and reduce the emissions of the customers that they lend money to. It's called financed emissions. That is coming as a big regulatory push. In California, they've implemented a policy which requires all of these large corporates, including banks, to measure and reduce their emissions. There are two really categories. One is the customers' emissions that lend money. The other is their supply chain. And I think that's what we're seeing lots more of around the world, is businesses now are saying, holy crap, if I need to keep supplying services to my corporate customers, whatever they need from me, my carbon footprint. So we've got a product that SMEs can use, which connects their banking data or their accounting data into an app where they can then manage their carbon footprint and report to their large corporate customers. And so that's a big growth area for us as well.
That's pretty amazing. So it's almost like due diligence around your carbon. So if they're going to choose you to be a vendor, they want to also see what's your carbon footprint. The same. I mean, we know we're more in the background of cybersecurity, and we see the due diligence aspect. But this is really interesting because it's now due diligence around your carbon footprint, especially if you want to do business with them as a vendor, provider, SME. Wow, amazing.
Correct. And then the banks then are like, that's a real need from the customer. The household, you could argue, is really more like a moral reason. They might be like, I want to do my bit and maybe I can save some money, but it's not really as compelling as it would be for a small business who banks and Wells Fargo who've said, I'm going to lose all my big corporate customers because they're telling me I can't sell stuff to them if they don't know what my carbon footprint is. And so that feels like for America is where we'll probably launch, I guess, all fingers crossed, go live first is a product for the small businesses, SMEs in America, because the large Apples or the, I don't know, Wells Fargo's, or even Wells Fargo, but definitely the large big corporates have set commitments that they're going to measure their emissions, and that includes all of their supply chain, right? So there's pressure coming on SMEs to do something, or they'll lose business, which is obviously a big compelling reason to act.
So that we capture it, I know this is going to be a question people are going to ask. Can you, that regulation that you said is coming down the pipeline, what is it again?
It's called the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So it's a disclosure regulation, TCFD. That's the acronym. So banks and large corporations are required to report. It's funny that the accounting world has a set of standards called IFRS. So when you report your financials, you report them in a standard IFRS standard. That is now where these regulations are taking sort of material, that's where they're going to live. So when you're a large corporate, you publish your financial statements each year. There's now regulation coming that's requiring you to then publish your carbon statement, if you like. Wow. And that's coming. US is definitely still slow on it, but California's done it, so they've pushed it through. It's not for every single company, it's the larger companies. But the thing about it is the larger companies have suppliers that are small, and when the large company has to report, they're going to have to go and find out. So I feel like that's they're the two angles for our business, right? We go out through banks primarily to get to the consumer and household, say, as an end user. And the other strategy is to go to banks or large corporates and promote this product for the SMEs that are either customers or in their supply chain.
That's pretty amazing. And I would assume with what you disclosure that you just mentioned, I would assume in the future for publicly traded companies, that's going to have to go out on their reports and earnings calls as well. I see that happening. That's
where they mostly start in countries. They usually say all public listed companies, it's the first ones off the block where you now are required. So New Zealand was the first country in the world to do it for the banks. But globally, there's a lot of pressure across those top FTSE 500 or whatever it is, and those companies. Now, some of them are voluntarily doing it anyway, just to be clear. So quite a few of these companies are already seeing the writing on the wall, and they're starting to ask themselves, well, what is our carbon footprint? And they're then asking their suppliers, well, hey, you provide us these services, you're part of our carbon footprint, tell us what yours are. So it's coming. And there's obviously a two-sided market, right? So you've got all these businesses doing their carbon footprinting. That's going to help when you as a consumer buy from that business, because then they've actually got their own carbon footprint, and then you'll start competing, one airline against another, one's using more biofuels or whatever, or one, you name it. Like in the end, I think carbon, will become another one of these things that you weigh up when you choose what to buy.
Pretty amazing stuff. Listen, absolutely amazing conversation. This is one of the conversations since I met you. I was looking forward to this because I wanted to learn more about the climate change and climate impact. I mean, the stats that I read, I had to do some research on the show. So it was good. And then I wanted to understand more about Cogo because I've never heard of this business model until meeting you. What I do for my guests, I'm going to give you the floor right now to talk to people, how they can find you, more about Cogo, anything that you want to say. So I'm going to get off the stage and give you the stage, my friend.
Great. Yeah, thanks everyone for listening. It's a good 50 odd minutes. Hopefully you found it interesting. We built this business to fundamentally improve the world for ultimately people that maybe don't deserve to be affected, but also to give you a chance to do your bit for climate. Definitely the call to action is banks in America, particularly, are like, nobody really cares about climate, or a lot of people don't believe in it. So I think the biggest thing you can do is just maybe drop your bank or pop into a bank and just say, hey, I think this climate change thing is something I want to do something about. Can you help me? And then they'll come knocking at Cogo's door, and hopefully, within a year or so, you'll be able to open up your app or jump online to your bank and be able to see what you can do about climate, and you'll feel good going to bed at night knowing you're doing your bit, and your kids will live in a future world that's, better. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Absolutely great stuff. To all, thank you very much for tuning in. Really appreciate your viewership. I'm sure the questions in this episode were going crazy. We'll be in the background. Well, we have in the future, me and one of Ben's colleagues will be in the background fielding questions while this goes live. So I hope, I know, I'm not saying I hope, I know it all worked out. And I know it was a fun episode, and I know that we answered all of your questions and it really engaged in a great comment conversation. Ben, thank you very much.
Reach out to me on LinkedIn if people want to fire me a question directly. You can find me on LinkedIn. There's only one Ben Gleisner, at least that I know of. Jump on my LinkedIn and pop me a question if we haven't answered all of yours today. And look forward to listening to the live show.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, once again, we're back every Friday, 12 p.m. live EST, 12 p.m. EST live. You'll catch us back at the Tech Behind FinTech. We thank you for watching. Look forward to your viewership. Love your engagement. And on that note, you're going to be watching this on a Friday. So I bid all of you a really great, spectacular weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.
Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.